All right, so let's do picks for UFC Fight Night Nashville, Lewis versus Teixeira. Picks for this card tonight as the 4th of July fireworks fly outside the window. Just figured I had a little time on my hands, so I might as well make picks. And there's some interesting fights on this card. A lot of fights with a very clear favorite, especially down here at the bottom of the card. We'll start at the bottom of the card with Fatima Kline, who's a negative 1,500 favorite over Melissa Martinez. Fatima Kline is the larger fighter, the younger fighter, and the more experienced fighter at a higher level. So I would strongly expect that the odds are right here and that Fatima Kline is going to win this fight. Well, I could give you a Mike Davis knockout here. I think Mike Davis is pretty safe to say that he's going to get a knockout here on Mitch Ramirez. Pretty big favorite. Not only does Mike Davis throw more takedowns, he's also a superior striker to Ramirez. So in all likelihood, it will be Davis by stoppage in this fight. I would think Davis by knockout. And Nzechukwu versus Valter is a very interesting fight here. This is another case on this card, in addition to the main event, of the UFC really wanting to build up a young heavyweight contender, I think, because the UFC heavyweight division is really struggling right now. Well, young, I don't know why I said young. I knew this beforehand. And Nzechukwu is 33 and Valker's 27. And Nzechukwu is the favorite in this fight because he's a southpaw with an 83-inch reach. You bet he throws 5.37 significant strikes per minute. And yeah, most of this guy's fights end in exciting ways, end in finishes either by win or by loss. And even though Walker is 13-1, I don't know if he's ever been in there with an all-action guy like Nzechukwu, who's going to really get in his face and really make him worry about both his range and his striking. The UFC octagon is a lot bigger than a boxing ring. It's a lot bigger than the ring in one championship, any other competition. It's a big surface. When you're in there with a guy with that long of arms, he's going to have to get in range before the punches and the knees and the elbows start landing and get a takedown, and use that takedown average that he's got and try to get him on the ground. It's either going to be Walker by some kind of submission or Nzechukwu by a KO. So this is going to be a fun fight and a fun heavyweight fight. And man, Valter Walker is a very, very fearless fighter to be getting in there with Kline Nzechukwu. 6'5" with an 83-inch reach southpaw. That's pretty nasty stuff to have to deal with. Murphy versus Moura. This is a classic example, I think, in women's MMA of the fighter with the superior ground control is probably going to win the fight. I really don't know how much Lauren Murphy, talented of a striker as she is, I don't know how much a 41-year-old Lauren Murphy is going to be able to do on her feet against Eduarda Moura. I think Eduarda Moura is just going to get the takedowns and secure a unanimous decision here. I think that's a pretty safe bet to make. Honestly, no picks for these next couple of fights other than they should be entertaining. I don't know enough about these fighters or about the depths of the welterweight division to this extent. Probably just fights that will be fun because honestly, it's a couple of fighters who, maybe coming towards the end of their careers or towards the end of their contracts in the UFC. So guys who have a lot to fight for, and it's definitely going to be an entertaining matchup if it's headlining a prelim. One would hope, although the standard of prelim headliners at UFC events is, especially UFC events like these, is subject to variate. Unfortunately, not to be too down on this card right now, but This is the term heavyweight slop. This is kind of heavyweight slop at light heavyweight. These two guys are probably going to try to knock each other out. It's probably going to be entertaining. That's all I really have to say. I'm not going to tell you to pick one way or another. This is just going to be a fun one. All right, now for Vitor Petrino versus Austen Lane, and this is a very clear winner for me. I've got Vitor Petrino in this fight. Very dangerous young fighter with a wrestling base, making his heavyweight debut, coming off a 2-loss losing streak at light heavyweight in the UFC. And, on paper, it might not be the best advised move up to heavyweight, but the UFC is definitely helping him with the transition to his new weight class because Austen Lane is going to be, I think, pretty easy opposition here for Vitor Petrino, especially coming off a loss. And, 6'2", 205, that's still a big dude. You still get to grow a little bit into heavyweight. He probably feels a lot better at heavyweight than he did at light heavyweight. If he's moving up a weight class, I don't doubt that that's a decision that he put a lot of thought into. I don't doubt that as a professional athlete, he knows his own body pretty well and he knows what's going to work for him. And Vitor Petrino is definitely a higher level wrestler than Austen Lane. I think he's a higher level fighter than Austen Lane. And I think he's going to beat Austen Lane, unsurprisingly, and give himself a pretty good start at the heavyweight division. I think we're going to start to see much harder questions asked of Vitor Petrino after this fight. And Charriere versus Landwehr. This is actually one of the more interesting stylistic matchups on the card, I think. because you've got Nate Landwehr, who's an MMA veteran. I've always kind of thought Nate Landwehr is one of the funnier fighters on the roster. This dude definitely thinks he's Steven Seagal. He's got like some like '90s like action hero vibe going on, where like he thinks he's like, yeah, some action hero from like '80s B movies or something. That's always the vibe I've gotten from Nate Landwehr. And he's definitely a UFC veteran and a guy who's well versed in the art of MMA. And Morgan Charriere is a guy who you can tell by his record has struggled a little bit coming up and on the regional scene, building his career up. But he's somebody who I think has learned MMA, kind of learning the hard way. And I think it's an example of Nate Landwehr. He did a lot of that work in the gym and in training, and Charriere did a lot of that work learning the hard way, losing in the ring. But as a 29-year-old fighter, I think right now, Morgan Charriere is in a far better place than Nate Landwehr. There's a much better chance. I mean, there's no chance at all that Charriere is over the hill. Landwehr could for sure look old in this fight. He could for sure look slow in this fight. And I think he will look slower than Morgan Charriere. I think Morgan Charriere has much better striking than Nate Landwehr. He's got a higher takedown average, as you can see down there at the bottom of the screen. He isn't smaller enough, I think, for it to be a big detriment. I think, if anything, it'll just accentuate the fact that he's the more energetic fighter. And I think Nate Landwehr is going to have a lot to deal with for Morgan Charriere in this fight. And I think Morgan Charriere is either going to win, honestly, I'm going to say a 3-round, a 30-27. Landwehr maybe can get a 29-28, but I think it's going to be Charriere 30-27 or by a finish, a late round finish, second or third round. I'm big on Morgan Charriere in this fight. I think that he's done a lot of good work to improve his skills so far in the UFC. Calvin Kattar is a very good boxer. A lot of people like to defend Calvin Kattar. I think a lot of people root for Calvin Kattar. They see him as a guy who had a lot of potential that he didn't make good on, or that he didn't make as much good on as they thought. He obviously got absolutely annihilated by Max Holloway in one of the most one-sided performances in UFC history. I think Steve Garcia would be very ill-advised to see Calvin Kattar as a guy that he can just beat down on, as someone who's just there for him to beat up on, but I don't think Steve Garcia does. I think Steve Garcia is taking Calvin Kattar as a very serious matchup, and I think he's going to beat Calvin Kattar. Steve Garcia is a talented striker. Calvin Kattar is a talented striker too, but he's taken a lot of damage. He's lost a lot of fights in a row, and it's 5 straight knockouts in the first 2 rounds by Steve Garcia, not to bury the lead. So, hopefully for the sake of the UFC fans, hopefully for the sake of Calvin Kattar, hopefully for the sake of just a spirit of sportsmanship and good health, hopefully Calvin Kattar doesn't get completely flatlined here by Steve Garcia. But Steve Garcia has been on a string of early round knockouts, and I wouldn't be surprised to see another one here over the veteran Calvin Kattar. Hopefully Kattar gets it to a decision, but to me, this being a pretty much even odds fight is crazy. Steve Garcia is going to get his 6th knockout in a row, and Calvin Kattar is going to taste defeat for, I believe it would be the 6th time in 7 fights. He's 1-5 in his last 6. He's 7-7 in the UFC. He's and 1-5 in his last 6, and it would be 1-6 in his last 7 if Steve Garcia knocked him out. Wonderboy Thompson versus Bonfim. Now, everybody loves Wonderboy Thompson, but my brother, I have some news for you if you think he's going to win this fight. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, this would be some Wonderboy stuff. Wouldn't it be amazing? I mean, could he actually get back some way into the welterweight title picture, into people's minds? It's such a crowded division. It's such a good division for a 42-year-old to have a real resurgence in it. I don't know about that. But on paper, it looks like he's being absolutely fed to Gabriel Bonfim here, 17-1, another highly ranked, highly rated Brazilian fighter here in the UFC. The UFC obviously trying to show off a lot of Brazilian talent here on this card, and Gabriel Bonfim maybe the finest among them. And to me, this is going to be very, very easy work. And I've been trying not to lean too much on these little ESPN stats here, but the 5 significant strikes with the 3 takedowns and the 2-2-1 sub average, the 76% takedown accuracy. I think Stephen Thompson, great of a fighter as he is at 42, it really is hard to see. It's just feeding the beast with Gabriel Bonfim here. I think this is going to be a pretty easy win here for the young Brazilian. And speaking of young Brazilian fighters, Teixeira, 8-0. It's only 8 fights. That's not a lot of experience, but we're talking about a 6'7" heavyweight here. And this is a pretty fun fight. It's how undefeated is 8-0 really? I'd say 8-0 in MMA is a lot more undefeated than 8-0 is in boxing, certainly, especially if you're headlining a UFC main event at 8-0. That's impressive in and of itself. Derrick Lewis, he has more knockouts in the history of the UFC than anybody ever. And the reason why this is a good fight, and a big part of the reason I wanted to make this video, is because Teixeira is in love with his striking. He loves punching. He loves standing in there and trying to trade, even though he has a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu base. And Derrick Lewis is the all-time knockout leader in UFC history. Somebody is going to get knocked out in this fight, and there actually is a decent possibility it could be Teixeira. Derrick Lewis, I'm sorry, he definitely still has that power. 40 is not old enough to take all of that power away. Teixeira has never attempted a takedown in the UFC. He's absolutely in love with his striking, and he's somebody who might not lean on his wrestling if given the chance. If he stays in the pocket in there with Lewis and tries to strike for too long, man, he could get caught. If standing and trading at the start of the fight doesn't work, Teixeira's going to have to go back to fundamentals, or he really could get caught here by Derrick Lewis. So I am going to pick Teixeira by knockout because he's younger, because he is a good striker. But if I were a betting man, I don't think I'd bet on this fight. It's a close fight. It could go either way. This is actually a very fun heavyweight fight. My only gripe against it, my only beef with it, is that, you know, if Lewis does win over Teixeira, you've taken yet another potential decent young heavyweight name. And I mean, you haven't shelved him completely, but you just got him knocked out, you know? That's not great. And maybe I'm talking a little bit too much like a boxing fan here, because losses just are losses in MMA, but getting knocked out is never good. And how much is it really adding to Derrick Lewis's legacy? I mean, is Derrick Lewis really going to come back and be a title contender? I mean, Derrick Lewis is definitely a gatekeeper in this division. He's never even been somebody who people really think is going to be a champion, right? He's just a striker. He sits there and he tries to land that big bomb, and if he doesn't land the big bomb, there's really nothing else with it. So it stands to reason that even if Teixeira can show off some flashier striking, he should be able to take care of Derrick Lewis. And even with a safe game plan, he should be able to take care of Derrick Lewis. So that's what I think is going to happen. I think it could be around 2 or around 3 TKO here for Tyson Teixeira rather than round 1. I think if there's a round 1 KO, it would be Lewis, which is crazy to say. And it is crazy that this fight is actually not close, but contested. This is not one of the bigger mismatches on the card, which is crazy because it's a 40-year-old with 12 losses against an undefeated young heavyweight. But part of that is the inexperience from Teixeira, and if Teixeira does get that knockout that I'm predicting, you know, we could have a new face in the heavyweight division. He's going to be a 6'7" Brazilian named Tyson Teixeira. So